let's kick it off. Let's pretend I just gave you like a long-winded introduction and we'll go straight into it.
All right.
All right. Welcoming to the Plug Podcast. I am beyond thrilled.
Wow. Neil, that introduction was incredible. Thank you. That was one of the best introductions I've ever received, Neil. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. And I spent weeks
doing what?
Writing the intro.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought you were going to say something else.
No, it's okay. Well, I didn't even get to say it, but welcoming to the show, Mr. Rainn Wilson. Sir, welcome to the podcast.
It is my profound pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I always like to just get straight into the podcast when we jump on these Zoom calls because I find it very awkward and uncomfortable just making small talk when the whole point of a podcast is to talk. So straight off the bat, I am and have been such a fan of yours for years. Pre The Office, I'm not one of those guys that just knows Dwight Schrute. Don't worry about it. It is so great to talk to you. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. That's great. Yeah, what do you want to talk about? We can talk about anything.
Well, look, the show is yours. We can talk about anything. I know you were just on the LA highway. How was that? How was that day for you?
You know, it's soul sucking. So I just did this. Show called The Geography of Bliss. Mm-hmm. It's going to be on Peacock at the end of May. And it's so funny because in research for the show, it's about me traveling the world looking for happiness and what makes people happy around the world and why some cultures are better at it than we are. But in all of the happiness research, one of the things that they say that most greatly reduces quality of life is traffic on a commute. It is like one of the, it's like literally like cancer, divorce, and traffic on a freeway. And getting around Los Angeles is hellacious. Is that a word? And it's brutal. But I strive to bring joy and bliss and uplift to whatever I interact with. So I'll try and let that go.
Are we allowed to plug the Peacock series yet? Do we have a release date?
Yeah, it's coming out May 18th.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll make sure we'll put that in there as well.
Yes. Thank you so much.
And before we get into the main topic of the show, which is this great book you're about to release, did you watch the latest episode of Succession? How do you feel about it?
I did. I am a Succession junkie. It's maybe the only show. No, that's not true. Because now I'm halfway through The Sopranos a second time, although that was 20 years later. But it's the only show that I watch every episode twice, within the first couple months of it coming out. Because one time to see the plot and how it unfolds, and the second time just to listen and revel in the dialogue, which is just extraordinary. And it's so nuanced and complicated and funny and sharp. But yeah, this last episode really surprised me. I mean, I did not think that we were going to lose him this quickly on in this season, and that I did not think that was how they were going to cover it, was just with a phone call, just a phone call, your dad's dying or is dead. And that was a master stroke, because that's how you find out this stuff, and what it feels like. And that just that 20-minute continuous scene of the scrambling of the family to try and make sense of it and process it and figure out their own agendas and their grief and their kind of relief at the same time it's one of the best television episodes I've ever seen.
And I love as well, they don't show you Logan at all. So for the first half of the episode, you think this is a play, this is a ploy.
Yeah.
And then they kind of just very nonchalantly show Logan's head. They don't even show his face, just he is on the ground.
Yeah.
It's happening. It's just so well done.
And his shirt off and so vulnerable. And it was really, that show is really next level. I'm really truly in awe.
Well, look, we can talk about Succession later in my Succession podcast. It's not a real thing, I promise.
Good.
But congratulations on this book, Soul Boom. Why we need a spiritual revolution. I got this book. We set this interview up probably 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, when I thought, oh, okay, I have plenty of time to read this. Once I started reading it, it was done in 24 hours.
Wow.
I relate to it so much. I have so many thoughts and feelings about it. And so much of what you wrote in the book, I felt like spoke to people like me and of the same mindset. So just to straight off the bat, I'm not a religious person, but I have grown up in Catholicism, primary and high school, Catholic schools. So maybe just to preface this, maybe just give us like a quick 2-3 sentence synopsis of this book, because I know you did the interview with Russell Brand a few days ago, which I watched and was so great as well. I promise you, I'm not going to be anywhere near as articulate as Russell Brand. But my big thesis for this, for anyone that I talk to about it, is the world is a mess. We need a giant reset and a refocus. But maybe I'll let you do the short synopsis.
Well, I've only done a small handful of podcasts and interviews about the book so far, because it's not coming out for a couple more weeks at the time of our conversation right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't really learned how to sum it up succinctly. And I thought what you said is just spot on. The world is in a mess of trouble. And if we think we're going to fix it with Band-Aids and little pieces of legislation and small changes in political parties, we are entirely 100% wrong. So humanity needs to rethink how it does everything. And my thesis is that there are spiritual tools embedded in the world's great religious and faith traditions, that you don't need to be a member of any religion. This is not a book purporting you, coaxing you toward any religious membership. So don't worry, everyone settle down. This is a book that, however, says Western society has thrown religion out, for the most part, for very good reasons, by and large. But in so doing, we've also lost sight of the fact that there are spiritual tools, there are spiritual foundations to what it means to be a human being that can be applied to societal transformation as well as personal transformation.
Yeah, and before we get into it as well, I know that you were writing this in the early stages of the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was when the pandemic hit. I was very sad at people dying and the world in great chaos and confusion. But inside, I was just a teeny tiny bit gleeful. I was a little bit like, yay! Now's my chance to write this book that I've been wanting to write for years on issues that I've been mulling over and coaxing and thinking and nurturing for decades. And so I started in, and then about 4 or 5 months into starting to write the book, my dad died. And this was heartbreaking. He had heart disease and died about 5 months into COVID, 3 or 4 months into COVID, while getting a quadruple bypass. And it was devastating. My dad and I were very close. We had gone through a lot together. My mom actually left me and my dad when I was about 1.5 years old, and I stayed with him. I was one of the rare kids that went with his father. So I was very close to him. We had a lot of ups and downs, but his death really prompted in me some far greater reaching thoughts and feelings. And it was at a very difficult and very important transition. And one of the chapters in the book is about death. I hit all the big topics. I've got God, death, consciousness, the sacred, religion,
The
the future of
notorious
humanity.
The notorious God was a personal favorite of mine.
The notorious God is a chapter about God, but the chapter on death is death and how to live it. And I think, I had a transcendent moment when I saw my dad on the table, having passed away, and just a deep and profound realization that, oh, this is not my father. This is the vessel that carried my father's essence, spirit, soul, heart, life energy around for 79 years. But this is not his reality. And it's so clear when you see a corpse on a table. Sorry to be so crass, but it's true. And as heartbreaking as it was, it got me thinking deeper about death, life after death, the soul, and our human journey here on this physical plane and in the infinite planes beyond this one. And what that means for us as a species, because one of my central theses in the book, there's several, but and by the way, Neil, I try and make it funny too. This is not all doom and gloom and kind of philosophical profundity.
Yeah.
I try and tell some jokes along the way, but the idea that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and once we frame life in that context, that puts a lot of things in perspective, and death can be a very valuable perspective giver. So that kind of 1-2 punch of COVID, having the time to write, my father's death really being a further catalyst, were some of the ingredients that got me probing these incredibly challenging topics.
No, thank you for mentioning that story, because that was one of the moments in the books that was really, really hit something with me as well. And the idea that, consciousness can't end when we die. I know that in recent years, a lot of maybe mainstream pop culture fans might relate to some stuff that Jim Carrey has said a lot in recent years. And for people who don't know, he said he kind of lost his identity when he played Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon. And now he kind of says that Jim Carrey doesn't exist. I don't exist. That Jim Carrey was a character. The consciousness is there, but I am not me. Is that something that you relate to when you talk about, the body being a vessel?
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I've never thought of it in quite those terms. There's many different ways of looking at this. In the Hindu idea of reincarnation, where the spirit comes back to kind of work out its issues on the planet, and the Buddhist idea of the bodhisattva, who reaches nirvana and Buddhahood, but chooses to return back to a human experience to serve others and to help deliver them from their suffering. That's similar to the Baha'i concept. I'm a member of the Baha'i faith, and the Baha'i concept is that when we're born, we have a soul that is attached or in reference to, in conjunction with our embryo that develops. And that's kind of phase one of life, is being in utero. And while we're in the womb, we are growing the physical components that we will need for life on this earth. I mean, I was just thinking the other day that babies have fully functioning eyeballs, at 8 months, that can do all of these miraculous things. They have rods and cones and lenses, and they refract and they go into the brain, and there's they can see color, and yet they're not functioning because they haven't encountered light yet. But will they soon? They will encounter that light. Oh boy, will they, and how, but not yet. So that death, the womb death, is a birth to a new reality, a much greater, richer, more complicated reality. And in the Baha'i kind of mythology, the same thing happens when we leave our meat suits behind and move on to our next plane of existence, where we're leaving this physical plane and moving on to an even deeper reality. And the eyes and ears and elbows and noses and senses that we take with us into the next world are the spiritual qualities that we're growing in this one. So our compassion, our kindness, our heart, our humility, our honesty, our love, our joy, our creativity, all of these qualities of the divine we nurture in us during this, our 70, 80, 90 year spin around the sun. And then we take those with us into the next phase. So that's a little closer to my personal belief, but it's all so mysterious. Who the hell knows?
Yeah. I mean, again, one of the things that I related to in the book, and I suppose this is a silly question when I say it out loud, but I love the idea of like doing good things now, being a good person now, loving your neighbor now. How could that be a bad thing to anyone, religious or not? How can anyone not abide by that simple concept of just being a good person? But when you relate that to the afterlife, whatever that may be, again, I know this is a weird thing to say out loud. Why do we need to be good now if there is an afterlife regardless?
Well, that's exactly why, because, well, there's a number of reasons why. First and foremost, it's what we should do. It's what all the great spiritual and religious teachers of the world have taught us to do, is to be better and better people and to work on ourselves, our character defects, and to encourage our better qualities, our angel qualities, not our devil qualities, our better angels, as Abraham Lincoln would say. So many, let's say, fundamentalist Christians might say, as long as I accept Jesus, I'm saved. So who the hell cares what I do in this world? This world is just a way stop. It doesn't really count for anything. I'm just living for the next world. I'm going to be saved and I'm going to go to heaven and sit with Jesus and drink wine and play the harp. For a lot of atheists, they might say, screw the next world. There's no next world. At the end of this consciousness, it's just lights out and blackness. And just like it was in pre-existence, we have no memory of pre-existence. We'll just cease. So let's live just for this world. Just live for this world completely. So what I'm proposing is that it's some of both. We live for this world because each day is a precious miracle that is fleeting and we should enjoy it. But also in this world, we have the opportunity to grow these spiritual qualities that we will need as we move on to subsequent worlds of existence, planes of existence. So we are kind. We seek to be kind because A, it's the right thing to do. B, it makes the world a better place. But C, as we develop our kindness is, we're not going to have Teslas and Rolexes and houses and, iPhones in the next world. We are going to take with us those qualities. So kindness is what is going to be our literal eyes in the next plane of existence. This is all very metaphorical. It's not, I'm speaking about it like it's this kind of formula, but it's all much more glorious and mysterious than the way I'm talking about it. The son of the founder of the Baha'i faith, Abdul Baha, says, he has a quote that says, "Become ye light incarnate." And I love that idea that, and when you meet really special people, there's a glow, right? There's a light to them. Like you see joy and creativity and compassion and humor and love in everything they do. And you see it in their eyes. And that's what we want to strive to develop.
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned at the start of the podcast, my mini thesis of the book is, we need a giant reset. And you mentioned some of the things happening in the world today, things like climate change. You mentioned gun control and the fact that something needs to be done. Otherwise, children will keep getting shot in schools. That happened 2 weeks ago. But one thing in particular that I wanted to mention was you put out a tweet maybe a month ago now, and it was about the priest in the Last of Us HBO series, and you said that there's potentially an anti-Christian bias in Hollywood because why is the priest always evil? And I know we gave Succession spoilers. The Last of Us spoilers is that character turns out to be a pedophile, a murderer, and a cannibal. Cannibalist?
Yeah.
And both sides, no matter where you sat, people had a field day with that. Fox News were almost using you as a spokesperson for them. But when I saw that tweet, I was like, is anyone actually reading the fucking tweet? You weren't trying to pick a side or take a shot. It was a simple, valid fact. And I when I saw that tweet, I laughed because I agreed. Like any Law and Order episode, anytime there's a priest, I'm like, that guy did it. And it's usually 9 times out of 10, that's true. That to me is a perfect example of like how broken things are when you said something.
Well, Yeah, I'm glad you bring this up, because to me, it was a tweet about lazy screenwriting.
Mm.
Because it's like, I see a priest reading from the Bible. I'm like, oh, he's going to be bad. So why do I jump to that conclusion? Not because priests are bad. Many of them have done really horrible things. And I don't believe in a hell, but I hope they burn in whatever the closest thing to hell might be.
Yeah.
But it's just lazy screenwriting. And it's totally unnecessary to have that extra level of reading a Bible. He could have been reading a cookbook, well, he's cannibal. That might have been a little bit weird. Human chili or something. I don't know.
Sure.
But yeah, so that tweet, part of the reset that I talk about in my book is I talk a lot about partisan politics as a litmus test of how broken society is. Recently, Joe Biden greenlit natural gas drilling. It's called like the Willow Project or something like that. Silence from the political left. If that had been Donald Trump in office, greenlighting it, there would have been hundreds of thousands of people marching in the streets and protests in Congress. There's such hypocrisy where we stand by our party, right or wrong. I just heard recently Ben Shapiro talking about justifying this billionaire Nazi memorabilia collector and his friendship with Clarence Thomas and taking him on all these vacations and cruises and stuff like that. Ben Shapiro, who is so quick to point out any kind of act of, something that might be considered anti-Semitic, here is defending this billionaire Republican donor who's got a signed Mein Kampf on display in his house. And he's like, well, what's wrong with that? He's a collector.
The idea, I think he said that people collect things to remind them that it's bad. It's like, I don't need Mein Kampf to know that Mein Kampf probably wasn't a great read.
I have never met a single person in my life who collects something to know that it's bad.
Yeah.
So, but my point is not to knock on him. It's like both of these cases show us that there is incredible hypocrisy in this party system where we have pledged our loyalty to these parties come hell or high water. And they are raking in hundreds of millions of dollars, and all they are seeking is power, and they are not seeking public service and the betterment of society. So this tweet is an example of that. Fox News puts me on a pedestal. Rainn Wilson calls out Hollywood for being anti-Christian, and then liberal secular folks rail against me about it. When just a month previous, I had tweeted about climate change or I had done this stunt where I changed my name for climate change on this app that we had developed. And I was vilified on the front page of Fox News for doing that. Like, oh, this ridiculous Hollywood elite changed his name for climate change. Oh, he probably flies around on his private jet, stuff like that. And I was lauded by the political left for doing it. So but people never look at the toxicity of partisanship. They only look at the toxicity of the other party, of the party that they're against. And they only hope to fix things with Band-Aids and not a wholesale reset. We're never going to fix problems in America with a two-party system that's raking in hundreds of millions of dollars that seeks to stab the other party and gain power, because those because those impulses are the worst impulses in humanity. One-upsmanship, dog eat dog, aggrandizement, aggression, contest, competition. Those are all the worst impulses in humanity. And all of our social systems are built on those concepts and those energies and those ways of interacting. So this sounds, I'm realizing how long-winded this is all sounding, but getting back to spirituality, I remember in the 70s when people used to talk about world peace and pray for world peace and wish for world peace and hope for world peace and strive for world peace. Nowadays, if you talk about world peace, people roll their eyes. They think you're the most naive idiot to walk the face of the earth. Human beings have always been this way. They always are. They're never going to have world peace. We just have to try and not blow the fucking shit out of each other. And it's all one gigantic eye roll. But if we want to affect real and lasting change, we have to take a giant step back and look at the systems and the foundation upon which those systems are built on. So I get into spirituality. I get into death, life after death, the soul, consciousness, God, because I want to like percolate on these spiritual concepts a little bit to realize that there are ingredients in spirituality that we can apply to societal change, not just personal transformation, like, oh, I can be a better person and more serene and more peaceful, and I can control my anxiety. I can also create community based on cooperation and on compassion and on mutual giving. And instead of being self-centered, being other-centered. We really can do that. We have done it in the past. We can do it again, but we have to believe that we can make that change.
Do you think then that conversation across the board is a good thing? And again, I mentioned Russell Brand because he was someone that when he started the Trues, his YouTube channel, it was kind of fighting the corporations. Now the political left believes that when he has people like Shapiro or Jordan Peterson on his show, he's now fighting for them. But is there not a middle ground where, regardless of your political beliefs, the only way forward is to talk, is to understand each other?
I believe that we need dialogue. We have to start with dialogue, and we have to find that common point of unity and work on fostering that. We've been arguing nonstop for decades, right? Turn on a news show, Crossfire, left, right, and center, Sunday morning chat shows, and they are just at each other. And like, well, the left, blah, 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 blah. And well, the Republicans, blah, blah, blah. And the Democrats, blah, 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 blah. Like, we've tried that. It's only separating people more. There's only creating further and further distrust and disunity. The example I use in the book is a man named Colin Greaves, and he works with Greta Thunberg, and he has been her speechwriter and worked on her team for years. And he works in youth advocacy for climate issues. And I met with him, and he said, long ago, I realized like the only way to make effective change in terms of climate change is to work on clean air. Clean air is the perfect example. Left, right, Republican, Democrat, libertarian, socialist, everyone can agree that we want clean air. We want clean air for our kids, right? It's really that simple. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, there's going to be some government regulation. There's going to be, community involvement. There's going to be corporate involvement. There's going to be some give and take. People might have different ideas on how to get there, but we have generally in the developed world had cleaner air over the last couple of decades. You see pictures of Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s, and the sky was just brown with smog. Now it's pretty rare when we get a smog day in Los Angeles, actually. So, of course, when you create clean air, you reduce CO2 emissions. So it's ultimately good for the atmosphere and for climate change to have clean air. But that's an example of how we can and should work together. And, for instance, you brought up gun control. Like, I can see, in some ways, I can see both sides. I try and put myself on the side of the political right and say, well, guns don't kill people. People with guns kill people. In other countries, they use knives. There was just an axe attack in Brazil. Some guy killed 4 people with an axe or something like that. And of course, if he had had a gun, he probably would have killed 40 people and not 4. But the point is that both things are true. We need to have regulation for guns, just like we have regulation on everything else. We have regulation on when you can go fishing, and regulation on when you can drive a car, and regulation on how and where and when you can vote. So we need increased regulation on guns, but we also need to enforce the laws we already have in place, which is something that the political right is always talking about. So that might be a place where we can come together. Let's enforce the laws that we already have in place and make it watertight. That's one place to start. So, I disagree with kind of hardcore lefties that are like, we shouldn't even talk to someone who has said something that they perceive to be racist because they're a racist and we're giving them a platform and whatnot. I think that, there's obviously a line. If someone is coming out and just saying just overtly, heinously, violently racist things, we shouldn't give them a platform. But we do need to be in a dialogue to find our way forward. We've tried the other way. We've tried this. It's been good 10 or 20 years of not doing it. It's not working. So let's try something different.
Yeah. And another subject you talk about so well in the book is the conversation around mental health. Now, I know you're a 70s kid. I'm a 90s kid. From your perspective, has the conversation around mental health gotten better, or is it worse, in the sense that, especially after the last few years with the pandemic, have things gotten worse on that side of the things, or is it in a better place, considering now that probably people my age and even younger are more upfront about their mental health?
Oh, it's far better. It's far better and it's far worse. The mental health epidemic is one of the worst pandemics facing humanity. It's the number one killer of young people. Suicides and suicidal ideation are through the roof. Anxiety, depression, loneliness. The youngest generation is now the loneliest generation on the planet. For the first time in human history that's been the case. Isolation, alienation, and despair. But at least we have a vocabulary for it, because when I was a kid in the 80s and when I was in my 20s in the 90s, I was suffering from a lot of mental health issues, especially anxiety, but also depression and loneliness and other issues, addiction. And we didn't have a vocabulary for it. I didn't know other people were feeling what I was feeling. There weren't any tools. There weren't any YouTube videos. There weren't any books. Yeah, there were therapists, and I started going to some therapists. Even the therapist didn't quite know how to frame it. So we've made tremendous progress. We have the advent of positive psychology, which has given us a lot of tools around happiness. It's part of what we explore in the Geography of Bliss show on Peacock, is, tools that we can learn from other cultures to help us have a greater rate of happiness and greater level of well-being. But we're unhappier than ever. So there's more and more tools and there's more and more unhappiness. Again, why we need a spiritual revolution. We're not going to get there with just better tools on being a happy person. And we're not going to get there with just kind of having more therapists. There is a gross imbalance in the world. And that, I believe, is the spiritual deficit that humanity is experiencing currently.
I didn't realize, I only found out recently, I know that you were raised in the Baha'i faith, but I didn't realize that you actually pushed it away when you started going through your own mental health battles. When was that?
Well, it's actually the opposite of what you said. I pushed it away when I moved to New York.
Right.
And wanted to study being an actor. I wanted to be a bohemian. I didn't want morality. I didn't want to think about God and the spirit and the soul and blah, 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 and, religion or anything like that. So I jettisoned everything having to do with faith and kind of went my own way, which a lot of young people do. Kind of a Baha'i version of Rumspringa from the Amish tradition. And several years into it, that's when I started really suffering. And I was abusing drugs and alcohol, and I was very in porn, and I was very lonely, and I had anxiety attacks. And it was in the midst of that despair that I started a spiritual search to kind of say, well, wait a second, maybe leaving my spiritual life behind and just turning towards this life of being a freewheeling bohemian in New York, maybe I've lost something. So I should maybe investigate what I really think and what I truly believe. So that was a very long, many years journey of thinking about God, reading various religious texts, learning about meditation, learning about Buddhism, and kind of a very long, slow, multi-year journey back to being a Baha'i, but a different kind of a Baha'i. I would say one that had reinvented for myself what it meant to be a member of this particular faith. And I should say, and I feel the need to say this, that Soul Boom is not a book about the Baha'i faith. I mean, I draw on many Baha'i examples in it and some inspiration because that's my faith, but you don't need to be a Baha'i. You don't need to be a Christian. You don't need to be anything. You can be what most young people are, which is spiritual but not religious. And to start a spiritual revolution, we need everyone. We need people of all faiths. We need agnostics. We even need atheists. It's very funny that you're Australian. My friends moved to New Zealand and they're Baha'is, and they started doing these youth and kid musical devotionals where they pray and meditate and they learn about spiritual virtues. And all the parents are atheists because it's New Zealand. Everyone's an atheist.
Yeah.
So, but these atheist parents really want their kids to have morals. They want them to learn how to be kinder, wiser, more joyful, more compassionate, more honest. And they really don't mind the fact that there are these Baha'i-inspired classes and workshops and whatnot on spiritual virtues and on meditation and on prayer, because they want their kids to have those tools, even though they don't believe in any kind of higher power. So we can all work on this together, and we can all work shoulder to shoulder with great empathy and incredible kindness and service to each other to affect a transformation. And I know that sounds very kind of airy-fairy, pie in the sky, but I do have some specifics in here. There are some specific ideas and takeaways, and I have the final chapter is the 7 pillars of a spiritual revolution. So I do put in some takeaways. It's not all just kind of pie in the sky nonsense.
I mean, I asked this just because I'm such a fan of your work and hearing the timeline of you going in and out of your faith. Where were you at, say, when you booked Galaxy Quest? Were you still very much on your spiritual search, or were you very much back in?
That was right in the beginning. Thanks for asking. That's
wow.
99. Yeah, that was 99. I just moved to LA. I booked Galaxy Quest. I got the part in Almost Famous. I did House of 1,000 Corpses, a horror film, a couple of pilots, a couple of small parts on some TV shows and movies. I was just getting my film and TV career going. And that's when I was just tiptoeing back into the Baha'i faith, investigating some meetings, reading a lot, pondering a lot. I started getting some more intensive therapy at that time. And I was very early on in the process.
Wow. Was there ever a fear that the more successful your career was going, that I suppose your mental health was going to go the other way?
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because I will say that one of the biggest mental health struggles I had was after I became famous. So, and it wasn't like the other one, but it was really a struggle with my own ego. Here I was early on in the office. I'd struggled for so long as an actor, and all of a sudden I was famous. I was a TV celebrity. I was making a lot of money. I was hosting Saturday Night Live. I was starring in movies, and at the same time I was miserable, and I was like, I wanted more. I was like, I deserve more. And I was envious of other actors whose careers were taking off, and how come they get that and I don't? And I wanted, it was not enough. And it's like, if I had been able to kind of have the perspective to say, hey, stop here a second. Like, you're on a beloved TV show playing a great character. You've got enough money. You've worked really hard. Like, just enjoy what you have. That would have been really helpful, but I didn't have the perspective at the time. And there were some really difficult years. A lot of the projects that I did bombed, and movies that I did didn't work, and I still think they're pretty damn good, but
Super is still one of my favorite movies.
Super was a great film. The Rocker is a really fun family comedy. A lot of the stuff that I did back then, but it was a different kind of struggle. So And that's the ancient human struggle. That's how it works. It's we it's never enough for
Mm.
us dumb human beings, and learning to be grateful for what we have, to enjoy the miracle of being alive, the miracle of each breath, of each heartbeat, um, is a lifelong path.
Mm.
Excuse me, frog in my throat. Yeah.
No, I think I've told this story on the podcast before. I had Josh Radnor on, who of course played Ted in How I Met Your Mother. And he said something very similar to what you said, that the more successful he got, the bigger the show got, the sadder he was. And as a working actor, his goal and dream is to be a big success. But the more success he got, the more depressed he got. So it really went hand in hand, that career's going great, mental health is going down.
Yeah, I've heard him give that talk, and I've actually had a couple conversations with him around that. And yeah, it was very much the same thing. It took me several years after that to kind of get out of it, of like, hey, wait a minute. And now when I look back at like my life post The Office, let's say, like I haven't had many breakout kind of hits, but I've really enjoyed the hell out of the work that I've been doing. Like I've gotten to play great roles in indie films. I've played cool villains, and I got to play Harry Mudd on Star Trek, and I've got to direct a little bit and podcast and do some interesting roles in series, and it's my dream come true. I get to be a working actor playing really cool roles. People may see them, they may not. That's out of my control.
Do you think you mastered that by the end, particularly the end of The Office? Do you think you mastered that? You know what? Fuck the outside noise. Just enjoy the ride. Or did that take, like you said, years after?
Yeah, it was years after. Exactly.
Right.
It was, yeah, I was struggling with it as The Office was ending and a little bit thereafter, but I don't know, the last 8 or 10 years or so have been really generally pretty happy. I have an anxiety disorder. I can slip into depression pretty easily. I have to work on this stuff. I have to have a daily kind of spiritual maintenance to stay balanced. But generally, I'm really super grateful and blessed, and not to mention how fortunate I am that the show, The Office, was is so lauded and beloved by people. It's really incredible.
You do mention as well, like there's plenty of funny throughout the book, and quite often you do like take shots at yourself of like, who is this former TV star? Who is this minor celebrity? Is that an intentional thing that you've done to keep that ego in check? Because you mentioned earlier that was one of the big problems, is that you got an inflated ego.
Well, it wasn't so much that. It was finding the right tone of like, if I just wrote a spiritual treatise that was very serious, people would be like, what the hell? This is the weirdest thing I've ever read. Dwight from The Office is writing a spiritual treatise. But if I made it all comedy and didn't have any substance, that's not true to who I am and what I need to say. So I needed to find a tone that was right in the book, where it's palatable, it's readable. Like you said, you read it in 24 hours. It's hopefully a page turner and has some nice self-deprecating humor throughout it. So people can hear my voice through it, but at the same time, I'm not afraid to kind of dig into some really deep, dark, difficult topics. Because that was my biggest fear, is like, are people going to simply reject this because they can't wrap their minds around the guy from The Office writing a book about spirituality?
You've got a book tour coming up as well, and here in New York, I think you've got In Conversation with BJ Novak.
Yeah.
I know this is a very cliched question, but doing a book tour and Q&As, is that anywhere near as daunting, if at all, compared to when a show or film comes out? You are having to get up on stage and essentially speak your mind and everything you've been thinking and feeling for the last, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, it's actually much more difficult when you do a TV or film press tour. you say, oh, I had a great time shooting this and I had a lot of fun with blah, blah, blah. And yes, we love the film and hope you'll go see it. And you dress up in a nice suit, you go on a talk show, you tell some funny stories, and that's it. It can be grueling, the schedule, but it's pretty easy. But that you do the same thing on a book tour, but like we're doing right now, like I have to be very present. I have to like really strive to be articulate and thoughtful and and keep the and see, I just totally lost my train of thought because I was thinking about how hard this was. It can be incredibly challenging to summarize a long, 300-page book, and every show I go on, there's a different kind of audience. I've done some podcasts that are like self-help. I've done some that are spiritual. I've done some that are comedic. And so I have to shift the tone as well to the people that I speak with, depending on the audience.
What was the Russell Brand one like? Because I think that was a blend of all those things you just said.
Yeah, that was the first interview that I did.
Yeah.
They needed to, for whatever reason, some stuff happened. They needed to release it early. It was going to be released in a few weeks, closer to the book launch. And yeah, I knew that Russell has an interesting audience. He definitely has people that are in the recovery community. He also has people that are interested in spirituality, but now he's gaining a big following that are kind of more, I don't even want to say like, they're not like right wing, but they're anti-authoritarian kind of Joe Roganites, which is an interesting audience. And they have a lot of very legitimate gripes and points and thoughts and feelings. So at the end of the day, I don't really care anymore. I'm too old to really care what people think about me. People are always mad at me for one reason or another. It's okay. It's fine. I'm doing fine. And so at the end of the day, I just needed to kind of speak my truth and share my message.
Yeah. And moving forward, I mean, according to IMDb, you have at least 5 projects in the works right now. What can we expect from you at least in the next 12 months? And they're going to get this book out and finally it be in the world. What's coming up after that?
Well, 3 weeks after the book comes out, this TV show on Peacock comes out, The Geography of Bliss, which I'm so excited about. Traveling the world, searching for happiness. It was just a dream job. I did a recurring role on this new series with Brie Larson, Lessons in Chemistry. I just wrapped on a movie called Code 3. I did a small part in a movie with Robert De Niro. I got to actually act with Robert De Niro. It was only for one scene, but that was a dream come true. And it's called, what's it called? Like Irrepressible Behavior or something. I think
is that the one with Rose Byrne and
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, okay. That's exciting.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff out there. I've got some other scripts that I'm developing, and so there's a lot that'll be rolling out over the next year. Inappropriate behavior.
There you go.
Inappropriate behavior.
People who read the book will understand this. One of the pitches you mentioned in the book that you took around Hollywood was about, I'm going to explain this poorly, but if alien life forms were observing humans, is that still alive somewhere? Because as you were pitching that in the book, I was like, I would watch the shit out of that show.
That was a podcast, that idea, which was a podcast by aliens, for aliens, looking at and observing human culture.
Right.
And these aliens are really interested in human media and popular culture. So they're also watching Succession and talking about TV shows, but they're also looking at like, wait, why do the humans continue to dump CO2 into the atmosphere? They know that this is screwing up their planet. Like what? And they just keep doing it. But they can talk. It allows a lens to see humanity through a very different perspective. So it's, I haven't done anything with it. It would be fun to do, but I've also only got so many hours in the day, and I'm not sure how well that one would pay and whatnot. So
yeah, Well, Rainn, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to talk to you and great to meet you again. I'm such a big fan of your work. Personally, I'll see you in New York with BJ on your book
Oh,
tour.
great. Please
But
say hi.
well, what do you want me to do? Yell from the crowd?
Well, come backstage and say hello. Well,
Okay.
my publicist can give you more information on how to do that.
Well, great. We'll do that. Well, Rainn, thank you again. Congratulations on the book. I can't wait for everyone to read this again from someone who probably isn't from the spiritual, religious side of things. I completely related to it. It spoke to me. I loved it. So,
Neil, I really thank you for reading it. And this has been a really wonderful conversation. And thank you for your interest and support. And I'm so glad you're going to join me on this spiritual revolution.